Yeah, thank you. And today I will be presenting on my PhD topic, the focus of which is on salt marsh soil carbon sequestration and the habitat's response to sea level rise. So in this presentation, I will first go over the background of blue carbon science and policy, and then very briefly summarize my three primary research objectives and present some very preliminary results, and finish off with the conclusions and acknowledgements. And I just want to acknowledge Richard's presentation because I feel like that set a really nice scene for this one, so thank you. But I will go back to the basics and just start off with a few definitions. So coastal wetlands are saline or brackish ecosystems that have a permanent or semi-permanent connection to the sea, and they host a wide range of flora and fauna. Coastal wetlands can be broken down into three environments: mangroves, salt marshes, and seagrasses. And collectively, these coastal wetlands are referred to as blue carbon ecosystems. And so for my PhD, the research is focusing on salt marshes. And these coastal ecosystems are also currently the only established blue carbon nature-based solution. And so this means that by restoring these ecosystems, carbon credits, in this case called blue carbon credits, hence blue carbon ecosystems. So these credits can be generated and sold just like for forest plantations, such as pine plantations. And currently, the only way to purchase blue carbon credits in New Zealand is through the International Voluntary Carbon Market. The Emissions Trading Scheme, the ETS, does not include coastal ecosystems. And as of now, the only country that has adopted a national blue carbon market is Australia. And so globally, these ecosystems are an essential component of various climate mitigation and adaptation strategies that aim to address the climate and biodiversity crises. And the fundamental goal of these blue carbon solutions is to reduce carbon emissions and to stop and reverse biodiversity loss. And so blue carbon solutions in the coastal space refer to coastal wetland conservation or restoration activities. And so obviously the aim of these activities is to reduce emissions or sequester additional atmospheric carbon dioxide, and also provide a multitude of co-benefits, such as the ones you see on the slide. So you've got coastal protection and increased community resilience, improved water quality, protection of the natural environment, biodiversity enhancement. And together, the aim really of all of these co-benefits is to bolster improved economic, social, and cultural outcomes for communities. And blue carbon solutions for climate mitigation and adaptation are mentioned in more than half of climate pledges made by governments. So specifically those kind of climate pledges to do with the Paris Agreement. And in Aotearoa, New Zealand, blue carbon has been recognized as a very important nature-based solution, and it's mentioned in the emission reduction and national adaptation plans and various local government climate change strategies. But in all of these plans and strategies, there's a big caveat. So more research needs to happen at a local level to understand the role that blue carbon can play in future climate change policy, particularly around how much carbon these ecosystems can actually sequester. What is the permanence of these carbon stocks? So once that sequestration happens, how long is the carbon locked up for? Particularly in light of future climate change impacts, right? So how will future sea level rise and other climate change impacts affect the ability of these ecosystems to lock up this carbon? And so in essence, there is not enough science, there's not enough research at this stage to back the inclusion of coastal wetlands in climate change policy just yet. And so now just a bit of a background on the science. So this is a profile of an intertidal area with salt marsh, mangrove, and seagrass habitats. And looking from right to left, below mean sea level, you've got either seagrasses or unvegetated mudflats and sandflats. Mangroves thrive in the area above mean sea level, and then the upper intertidal zone, subject to spring high tides and astronomical tides, is home to salt marsh. And so blue carbon refers to carbon that is captured and stored within the soils of seagrasses, mangroves, and salt marshes. And these ecosystems are very efficient at trapping carbon in their soils because the wet, low oxygen conditions slow the decay of organic matter. And the rapid burial rates of this plant matter alongside the sediment that's brought in by the tides have enabled these ecosystems to effectively accrete vertically and keep pace with relative sea level rise so far. And so this means that healthy coastal wetlands, and note the emphasis on healthy, so there is no human interference, these wetlands can keep that carbon stored away for centuries, theoretically. But it's also important to note that coastal wetlands emit greenhouse gases as well as sequestering them, but the emissions have been shown to be relatively small in comparison to the sequestration benefit. And so despite their recognized importance in climate mitigation and adaptation efforts, coastal wetlands rank among the most threatened habitats on Earth. In Aotearoa, 90% of all wetlands, so this includes freshwater and coastal, the estimate includes these ecosystems. So they've been drained either for agricultural use or coastal development. And when coastal ecosystems degrade, either through human interference or through natural disasters such as cyclones and in the longer term sea level rise, those vast stores of carbon are released in the form of three major greenhouse gases: carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. And this further contributes to increasing greenhouse gases and accelerating climate change. And as I mentioned in the previous slide, coastal wetlands are vulnerable to sea level rise. There are studies indicating that if sea levels rise too quickly, the wetlands won't be able to keep up that vertical accretion and will be drowned. But there are other studies indicating that it's possible to implement adaptation strategies to make these wetlands keep pace with sea level rise. So actually, that could be part of the solution for adapting to sea level rise around Aotearoa. And as Richard mentioned and went into details, coastal wetlands provide protection from storm surge and sea level rise. So understanding how these habitats may respond to rising sea level, it's very important for future implementation of flood defenses in both urban and rural settings. And the use of coastal wetlands in hybrid flood defenses is well documented in literature. This diagram in the slide illustrates the benefit of reinstating a salt marsh, which can work in conjunction with human defenses like seawalls. So simply rebuilding a seawall after it's been breached, it's not a viable long-term solution. But reinstating a salt marsh along with some sort of human defense can provide longer-term protection. And so just very briefly, for my PhD research, I've got three primary research objectives. The first one is to understand the potential for salt marsh sediments to sequester carbon from the atmosphere by collecting and analyzing soil cores from a range of salt marsh sites in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And the diagram to the right here shows my study locations around the North Island of New Zealand. And these are Ranunu Harbour in Northland, Pukorokoro Miranda in the Firth of Thames, and Paotahanui here in Wellington. And the idea is to basically compare how the stocks and sequestration rates vary depending on the site environmental history and existing land use pressure. So all of these salt marsh sites are either modified or restored or modified. And so, yeah, we'll really like to compare how those carbon stocks and sequestration rates vary. And the second objective is to model the response of salt marsh habitats to rising sea levels. And the idea here is to optimize an existing hydrodynamic model of Rununu Harbour, specifically for salt marsh and mangrove environments, and combine it with the latest NZ sea rise projections to effectively assess how salt marshes and mangroves are likely to respond to rising sea levels. And also ultimately what that means for carbon sequestration and all of those co-benefits. And last, once we have a better understanding of the carbon sequestration potential and the response or the potential response to future sea level rise, we can perform a cost-benefit analysis, and Richard also touched on this, specifically a cost-benefit analysis for salt marsh restoration projects. And so the objective of this cost-benefit analysis is to compare the profits based on blue carbon credits, either under a voluntary carbon market or a potential national carbon market, and all of those associated co-benefits that would be available from salt marsh restoration. So compare those costs and benefits versus the financial return and the cost from traditional land use practices. And here are the preliminary carbon sequestration results for the Northland case study. And so this is based on analysis of half of the cores collected from this harbour. And on the left, I've just shown the core locations. So we've analyzed just over half of these cores. And based on this preliminary analysis, the sequestration rate is about 0.84 tons of carbon per hectare per year. And based on this, the existing salt marshes in the harbour could be sequestering approximately 400 tons of carbon per hectare per year. Now, I know people automatically just want to know, like, how does this compare with pine plantations, for example? But comparing this sequestration rate with forest plantation sequestration rates is really difficult. First of all, this is an incomplete data set. And then the sequestration rates are for soil only and don't include the above ground biomass stock. And this is also not the net carbon sequestration rate, right? So remember I mentioned these ecosystems still emit greenhouse gases as well. So for us to understand the net carbon sequestration, we'd also have to subtract those emissions. But we can make a very generalized comparison. So given that on average, a hectare of pine trees locks up about 4 to 7 tons of elemental carbon per year, this rate of 0.84 is about a quarter of the rate for pine plantations. But these preliminary sequestration rates are actually consistent with reported average values for salt marshes in Australia and the rates reported by the IPCC. So that's promising. And here is some very preliminary inundation modeling in Rununu Harbour, assuming complete removal of stop banks in the harbour. So on the diagram on the left, for Rununu Harbour, mangroves are bright green, salt marsh is pink, and the salt marsh restoration space, which is based on that preferred elevation range of the habitat, that's in blue. And so based on this very preliminary run, removal of all stop banks in the harbour could create additional sequestration of almost 1,000 tons of carbon per hectare per year. And of course, all of those associated co-benefits. But we need to understand how restoration of these ecosystems could be impacted by future sea level rise. And so this is the next step of this work. And of course, before these restoration projects can really take off, we need to understand whether they're economically feasible. And this information is essential for landowners, as they need to understand the costs and benefits of restoring coastal wetlands on land that could be vulnerable to sea level rise and prone to flooding currently, versus traditional agricultural use or other forms of coastal development. Yeah, and so with that, some conclusions. We don't currently have enough data to include blue carbon in any climate change policy yet, but the good news is there are several national programs currently happening, the objectives of which are to collect this data and also to model how sea level rise can impact these ecosystems in the future. And also, it's really important to remember all of those co-benefits that play a significant role alongside that carbon sequestration, even if the carbon sequestration is a bit smaller than pine trees. All of those co-benefits can really, really bring the necessary finance to get these projects off the ground. And I would just like to finish off with some acknowledgements. Richard Levy, my supervisor, and Joss Ratcliffe, all the people from VUW, Antarctic Research Center, and all of my collaborators. There are a lot here. I won't go through every single name, but they all know who they are. Thank you very much.